Just months ago, the US and European Union stood shoulder to shoulder, slapping sanctions on China's electric vehicle industry, accusing Beijing of flooding global markets with cheap, state-backed EVs. The goal? Protect Western automakers. The result? A spectacular backfire. Today, Europe's car industry is unraveling, crippled by rising costs, factory slowdowns, and mass layoffs. Now, in a dramatic twist, the very leaders who tried to block China's EV dominance are quietly asking Beijing for help. What was supposed to be a display of Western strength has turned into a desperate plea for survival. So how did the world's most advanced economies go from sanctioning China to depending on it? Stay tuned, because this isn't just a trade dispute. It's the start of a global realignment in the future of transportation. In early 2025, the European Union and United States announced sweeping sanctions and tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles, accusing Beijing of distorting global competition through state subsidies and aggressive underpricing. The penalties were meant to defend domestic automakers like Volkswagen, Renault, and Ford, but the impact was anything but defensive. China responded with strict export controls on rare earth materials and EV battery components, elements Europe had become deeply reliant on. Within weeks, European auto production slowed dramatically, unable to secure affordable parts. EV rollouts stalled, battery prices surged, and supply chains collapsed. Now, less than 6 months after the sanctions, European leaders are discreetly negotiating with Beijing, seeking exemptions, partnerships, and raw material access to stabilize their industries. The irony is inescapable. Sanctions meant to weaken China's dominance have instead amplified it. Meanwhile, China continues expanding its EV partnerships with BRICS nations, Southeast Asia, and South America, turning away from Western markets entirely. As Chinese automakers gain global ground, Europe is scrambling to recover, only to realize it may now need the very nation it tried to isolate. The result? A geopolitical power shift, and China sitting comfortably behind the wheel. The roots of this crisis trace back to China's meteoric rise in the electric vehicle sector. Over the past decade, Beijing invested billions into EV infrastructure, battery research, and global partnerships. By 2024, Chinese automakers like BYD, NIO, and XPeng were producing EVs that were not only affordable, but technologically advanced, and rapidly gaining market share across Europe. Western automakers sounded the alarm. European factories couldn't match China's scale or cost efficiency, especially with energy prices and labor costs rising. Politicians responded with populist urgency, framing Chinese EVs as an existential threat. The US imposed sweeping tariffs, while the EU launched investigations and slapped anti-subsidy duties. But what lawmakers failed to grasp was how dependent their own industries had become on Chinese technology and supply chains. From lithium-ion batteries to cobalt refining and electric motor parts, much of the EV ecosystem ran through China. Sanctioning Chinese EVs wasn't just a blow to Beijing, it was a hit to Europe's own assembly lines. The assumption was that Western automakers could adapt quickly. The reality? They were never ready. Instead of cornering China, the West exposed its own industrial vulnerabilities, and now it's struggling to keep the wheels turning. Europe's car industry, once the pride of its economy, is now in disarray. Since the sanctions on Chinese EVs took effect, manufacturers across Germany, France, and Italy have faced crippling supply shortages. Assembly lines are stalled, orders are delayed, and thousands of workers have already been laid off. German automakers like Volkswagen and BMW, who relied heavily on Chinese battery components, have reported massive production delays. In France, Renault has slashed its 2025 EV targets by nearly 40%. Even luxury brands like Audi and Mercedes, scaling back. Launches due to rising material costs. The ripple effects extend beyond factories. Auto part suppliers, transport companies, and even EV charging infrastructure projects are feeling the squeeze. investment is drying up as uncertainty clouds the entire sector. Ironically, European customers, facing rising EV prices, are now turning to used Chinese EVs or delaying purchases altogether, further hurting domestic brands. What was meant to protect Europe's auto giants has instead paralyzed them. And with no domestic alternatives ready to scale, Europe's industrial base is facing a grim truth. In trying to block China's rise, they may have accelerated their own decline. While Europe scrambled to contain the fallout, China stayed 3 steps ahead. It didn't just dominate EV production. It quietly built control over the entire supply chain. From lithium extraction in Africa to cobalt refining in Indonesia and battery cell factories across Asia, China has created a vertically integrated EV empire. When sanctions hit, Beijing didn't retaliate with bluster. Instead, it tightened export approvals on rare earth minerals, battery tech, and semiconductors, the very components European automakers depend on. China knew its leverage, and it used it smartly. Not by cutting off supplies entirely, but by introducing delays, inspections, and limited export quotas that sent prices skyrocketing. At the same time, Chinese EV firms ramped up exports to BRICS nations, expanded into Latin America, and strengthened trade deals with Gulf countries, securing new demand outside of the West. Beijing's message was clear: if you don't want our products, others will. China didn't just absorb the blow, it turned the moment into momentum, and now, as Western markets falter, Beijing holds the keys to the global EV revolution and is in no rush to hand them back. Though both Washington and Brussels sanctioned China's EV sector, their responses to the crisis have taken very different paths. In the U.S., the Biden administration has doubled down, expanding tariffs and announcing new federal subsidies for domestic EV makers. Politically, standing tough on China remains popular, and the U.S. market is less dependent on Chinese parts due to years of decoupling. But in Europe, the tone has shifted from defiance to desperation. Behind closed doors, EU officials are now pushing for quiet re-engagement with Beijing. Reports suggest Germany and France have already sent delegations to China to discuss raw material access and possible joint ventures. The message is subtle but clear. Europe can't afford a prolonged standoff. Meanwhile, European automakers are growing restless. CEOs from Volkswagen, Stellantis, and Mercedes have all warned that unless supply chains are restored, Europe's EV future could collapse before it begins. This divergence is exposing cracks in Western unity. While the U.S. seeks confrontation, Europe needs cooperation, even if it means walking back the very sanctions it once championed. In the race to dominate the EV era, politics may soon give way to economic survival, especially in Brussels. As the West grapples with internal contradictions, the rest of the world is quietly recalibrating, and China is at the center of it. BRICS nations have already seized the moment. Brazil and South Africa have expanded EV trade deals with Chinese automakers, while India, despite geopolitical tensions, is allowing select Chinese battery suppliers to enter the market under revised terms. In Africa, Chinese-backed lithium projects are accelerating, with supply chains now bypassing Europe altogether. Southeast Asian countries, from Thailand to Indonesia, are fast becoming hubs for Chinese EV assembly lines, offering cheap labor and political stability. Meanwhile, traditional Western automakers are losing global market share at an alarming pace. Chinese EV brands like BYD and Geely are dominating in Latin America, Central Asia, and parts of the Middle East, filling the void left by Europe's faltering industry. Even in developing economies, Chinese EVs are becoming the default choice: affordable, reliable, and delivered at scale. The sanctions that were meant to isolate China have instead repositioned it as the preferred partner for much of the world. And as Western supply chains fracture, the global market is tilting toward Beijing, one EV at a time. The EV war isn't just about cars. It's about who sets the rules for the next industrial revolution. For over a century, the West led the global automotive sector. Brands like Ford, BMW, and Renault shaped transportation, jobs, and even geopolitics. But today, that legacy is being reprogrammed in real time, and China is writing the code. By weaponizing efficiency, supply chain control, and affordability, China has done what the West feared most. It made the future cheaper, faster, and more scalable without Western permission. Home reports. Sigh, assure. The EU's attempt to halt that rise through sanctions has backfired, exposing not just industrial weakness, but strategic overconfidence. Meanwhile, the US remains defiant, but isolated. What we're witnessing is a deeper transformation. Economic nationalism is colliding with global interdependence. And while Western leaders debate policy and politics, China is building roads, charging stations, and factories everywhere else. This isn't just a temporary setback for Europe. It may be a permanent reordering of the global auto hierarchy. And unless the West adapts fast, the age of German engineering and American horsepower may give way to a new era of Chinese electric dominance.